Okay, picture this. Um, a cyber criminal, they break into a network and it takes them just 2 minutes to get deeper, like really get into that sensitive data.
Yeah.
And that's not some, crazy movie plot. That's real life, according to this 2024 CrowdStrike Global Threat Report.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. This report, it's like it gives you this look inside, the minds of these cyber criminals. It analyzes everything, like how they think, their tactics. It's all there. It's like if you want to stay ahead in cybersecurity, you gotta check this out.
It's a roadmap of sorts.
Absolutely.
So, cybersecurity, it's not like you just, set it and forget it anymore, right?
It's definitely not.
It feels like we're in this whole other world, like it's a cyber arms race,
Yeah.
AI, these tactics that keep changing.
You got it. And this report, it actually points out some trends that they're pretty striking. Like, just this year, they found 34 new adversaries. So now they're tracking like a total of 232. It's crazy.
That's a lot of people to keep track of. And they're getting results, too. The report mentions cloud environment intrusions. Those are up 75% year over year.
Right.
And those eCrime leak sites, like the number of victims on those has gone up by 76%.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different ballgame.
Oh, for sure. And the interesting thing is 84% of these guys, the ones who've really figured out these cloud attacks, they're all about eCrime.
Yeah.
It's all about the money for them.
It's a business.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Let's dig in a little bit. The report, it talks about interactive intrusions. What does that even mean?
So interactive intrusions, they're different, right? They're not your typical malware attack.
Okay.
Instead of using malware that's automated, they're actually using like these normal tools and techniques, but they're doing it manually. It's like, imagine someone sitting at your keyboard, but they're doing it remotely.
Oh, that's creepy. So it's like instead of leaving a trail of malware, they're basically like ghosts in the system. Okay, but why? Why is that so effective?
Well, for one, it's much harder to detect. Like your typical security tools, they're looking for, signatures, these patterns they already know.
Right.
But with these interactive intrusions, these guys are using tools that are legitimate. They're acting like a normal user.
Mm-hmm.
So they blend in.
They're invisible.
Pretty much.
So the report mentions something called breakout time. What is that exactly?
So breakout time, that's basically the time it takes for, once they're in, how long does it take them to move around in the network?
Okay.
How quickly they can spread. And the scary part is the average time now is 62 minutes.
That's not much time at all.
No, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And the fastest they recorded was 2 minutes and 7 seconds.
2 minutes. That's insane. I mean, you haven't even finished your coffee, and they've already gone through everything.
It's scary how fast it is.
Wow.
That's why it's so important to keep an eye on this trend. It's not just about stopping them from getting in. It's also about, okay, if they get in, how do we limit the damage? We got to change our thinking. It's not just about protecting the perimeter anymore.
Except for assume they're already in and go from there.
Exactly. Focus on quickly detecting them and responding quickly.
So who are these interactive intrusions targeting? I mean, is it specific organizations or is it just everyone?
Honestly, it could be anyone, but some sectors, they're definitely getting hit more than others. The technology sector, that's like the #1 target.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got telecommunications, finance, government. If you got valuable data, important infrastructure, you're a potential target.
Everyone's a target then. So if they're not using malware, how are they getting in? How are they moving around?
We're seeing more and more identity attacks, things like phishing, social engineering.
Okay, so it's not just about stealing passwords anymore.
No, it's not that simple. They're going after all these different types of digital identities, API keys, cookies from your sessions, one-time passwords, even Kerberos tickets.
Hold on, Kerberos tickets. What are those?
So they're these digital tokens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they give you access to credentials that are encrypted.
Oh, okay.
So if they can steal one of those tickets, they can basically pretend to be you and get into all these sensitive systems.
So they're getting past multi-factor authentication.
Right.
Which we've always been told, that's the gold standard. That's what protects you.
Right. But they're finding ways to exploit the weaknesses, how it's set up, or they're using social engineering tricks, getting users to give up their codes, those one-time codes. It just shows technology by itself isn't enough.
Yeah.
We got to be smarter about how we use it,
And how we educate people.
Absolutely.
So the report, it mentions some specific adversaries who are really good at these identity attacks.
Yeah, it talks about some pretty notorious groups, Fancy Bear, Cozy Bear, Scattered Spider. These groups, they're known for Their social engineering campaigns, they're really sophisticated, and they can compromise these high-value targets.
So, give me an example. What are they doing specifically?
Well, Fancy Bear, they created this whole toolkit, right, to steal credentials from Yahoo and UKR.net email users.
So even your email isn't safe.
Right. And Cozy Bear, they've been using, Microsoft Teams messages to trick people into giving up their MFA tokens.
So even just a regular message on Teams could be a trap. I'm definitely going to be more careful checking my messages now.
It's a good reminder. Anytime anyone's asking for sensitive information, you got to be careful, even if it looks like it's coming from somebody you trust.
What about Scattered Spider? What do they do?
They're different. They're super focused in who they target.
Okay.
They go after specific people in an organization. Often it's people in IT or security roles, the ones who have access to the important systems.
They're going right for the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah. And they're smart about it. They use these residential proxies, so it hides their location, makes it look like they're logging in from the employee's house or office.
They make it look like it's the actual person.
Exactly. So it's even harder for security to pick up on it.
It's like they're using our own tech, our own trust against us.
That's a big theme in this report. They're getting really good at using the very things we rely on, the systems, the relationships. They're figuring out how to use it against us, and they're always adapting.
So it's like a constant cat and mouse game.
Definitely.
We've got to stay one step ahead. Speaking of adapting, the report also talks about the cloud, how it's becoming this new battleground.
Right. There's this huge increase in what they call cloud-conscious intrusions.
Mm-hmm.
These are attacks where they get how the cloud works, and they're going after those systems specifically and the data that's in them.
So earlier we talked about those numbers, the 75% jump in cloud intrusions, and the fact that 84% of those attackers, they're driven by eCrime. But what does it actually mean to be cloud conscious? What are they doing that's different?
It's not just about knowing how to use the cloud. It's like they understand the unique things about the cloud, how it's built, the weaknesses. They're using things like leaked credentials, password reset systems that aren't secure, even brute force attacks, just to get in.
So they're using every trick in the book.
Oh, yeah. And then they set up shop. They hide within identity systems like Microsoft Entra ID used to be called Azure Active Directory. So it's not just about breaking in. It's about staying there, hidden.
It's like they're setting up camp in your cloud.
Exactly. And once they're in, they start escalating privileges, stealing credentials from wherever they're stored, moving around, going between your systems in the cloud, and then finally getting the data out using all sorts of techniques.
So they're systematically taking over the whole cloud infrastructure.
It's pretty scary when you think about it. And the report, it gives some very specific examples.
Can you give us one, like a real-world scenario of how this plays out?
Sure. So take Scattered Spider.
Mm.
They were using an identity provider to get into Microsoft Entra ID and stay there.
Okay.
And they did the same thing with Okta, another identity management platform. And there's this other case. They got into this North American software company's cloud environment, and they got more access by, adding a new access key to a user that was already there.
Just sneaky.
Yeah, and then they used stolen Microsoft 365 credentials to look through SharePoint for, VPN setup instructions so they could move from the cloud into the company's actual network.
Oh, wow. So they went from the cloud to the physical network.
Exactly. And to get the data out, they just used S3 browser as an open source tool and just transferred it to their own cloud storage.
It's amazing how they can connect all these different things together, these tools, these techniques to get what they want.
It is. And they're not picky. They'll go after Azure Key Vault, Cloud Secrets Managers, SharePoint, any place where information is stored.
So you can't just focus on your own systems. You got to think about how your data is being stored in the cloud and make sure that's secure too.
Absolutely. Security in the cloud, it's a shared responsibility. And it's different from how we used to think about security. You got to think about things like identity, access management, encryption, and making sure the whole cloud supply chain is secure.
So it's a whole new way of thinking about security.
Definitely.
And this brings us to another big thing from the report, how they're exploiting relationships with third parties.
Right. Attackers are figuring out that it's easier to go after the weakest link. Maybe it's a partner, a supplier, rather than attacking a company directly.
Where the defenses are weaker.
Exactly.
Okay, so explain how this works. How are they using these relationships?
One way is through the software supply chain. They might put malicious code to a software update, something that looks legitimate.
Oh.
And then that gets sent out to tons of organizations. Or they might use their access to an IT service provider to get into their clients' networks.
So one compromise can lead to a whole domino effect.
Exactly. And that's why it's so effective for them. High return on investment, low effort. One attack, big impact.
And the report gives some examples of how this happened in 2023.
Right. We see China Nexus adversaries like Jackpot Panda and Cascade Panda doing this more and more. Jackpot Panda used like a fake installer for this Chinese chat app, Cloud Chat.
So something that seems totally normal
Right.
could have something bad hidden in it. It reminds me, we always got to be careful about what we download, even if it looks like it's from a place we trust.
For sure.
Yeah.
And Cascade Panda, they were intercepting like real update traffic and using that to send out their own tool called WinDealer.
So they're hijacking the systems we use to stay secure. That's crazy.
It is. And it's not just nation states doing this. The report talks about how someone, we don't know who, compromised an information security software company in India and used that to send out bad software to their clients all over the world.
Shows that it's a global problem. It can happen anywhere.
Absolutely. And North Korea is getting in on it too. Labyrinth Shalima, they're mentioned in the report, they're also abusing these trusted relationships. Like they even messed with software at 3CX, a VoIP provider. And they used a fake version of CyberLink Media Player to spread malware.
So they're going after the tools we use to communicate, to work together.
Exactly.
And they're always finding new ways to do it. It's scary how creative they are.
It is. I think the big takeaway here is we've got to be more aware of the risks that come with working with other companies. We need to really vet them, make sure they're secure, and be ready to respond quickly if something happens. We can't just assume they've got it covered.
Right. We can't just trust blindly. We have to take an active role in managing these risks. Okay, so we've talked about these interactive intrusions, identity attacks, and how they're using third-party relationships to get in. It's clear that attackers are getting smarter and they're finding ways to get past our defenses. But the report also mentions something else, a trend that's not as obvious, but just as worrying. They're going after vulnerabilities in places we don't always think about.
Exactly. Like network appliances, phones, old products that companies haven't updated in a while, things we don't always see as the main targets.
So they're looking for weak points, the things we might not be protecting as well as our main systems.
Right. And a lot of times they find them because these devices are running old software that hasn't been patched, so they're easy to exploit.
So it's not just about having the latest security software, it's about making sure your whole network is secure, from the center out to the edges.
Exactly. And the report has some examples from this past year. We saw vulnerabilities in firewalls and VPNs from Cisco, Citrix, and F5 being exploited. There were attacks on Ivanti's mobile device management applications, and the Akira ransomware group used a vulnerability in Veeam backup and replication to go after backup infrastructure.
It just goes to show, no system is perfect. There's always a weakness somewhere, and it's often where we least expect it.
That's why we need a more comprehensive approach to security.
Yeah.
We can't just focus on the obvious targets. We need to think about every possible entry point.
So we have to think bigger, look at the whole picture. We have to think about all the devices that connect to our network and make sure they're secure, from our laptops and phones to our printers, security cameras, and even those smart devices in our homes.
It all matters.
Well, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We've talked about interactive intrusions, how identity attacks are getting more complex, the risks of third-party relationships, and the need for a more holistic approach to security. But the CrowdStrike report isn't just about looking back, it's about looking ahead. And what they see coming is, well, let's just say it's complicated.
There are definitely some challenges ahead, but there are also opportunities.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore those challenges and opportunities in more detail. We'll dig deeper into the emerging threats that are likely to shape the cybersecurity landscape in 2024 and beyond. So before we jumped into that break, we were talking about how these attackers, they're getting creative, going after those less obvious entry points like, network appliances, those older devices, stuff we might not think about as much.
Right. It's like they're always looking for that open window, that weak spot.
Exactly. And it's not just those big headline-grabbing attacks, right? The report also talks about what they call targeted eCrime. These smaller groups, they're focusing on specific companies, specific industries.
Yeah, they're like specialists going after a particular niche.
I'm curious about this targeted eCrime. Are they using like the same level of sophistication, the same tools as those big players?
Well, what's interesting is these smaller groups, they're using legitimate tools, but they're twisting them, using them for bad stuff. Specifically, they're into these remote monitoring and management tools.
RMM tools.
Yeah, RMM tools.
Okay, remind me, what are those exactly, and why are these cybercriminals so interested in them?
So basically, RMM tools, they let IT admins, manage computers and networks remotely.
Okay, so they're supposed to be helpful.
Yeah, it's like having like a virtual IT guy, can access your stuff from anywhere.
So convenient, but in the wrong hands.
Exactly. That's why attackers love them. Because they're so common, nobody really thinks twice if they see them, which makes them perfect for sneaking in.
It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
You got it.
Okay, so how are these targeted eCrime groups actually using these RMM tools? Give us some examples.
Okay, so one example, Chef Spider, they use social engineering, tricking people into downloading ConnectWise Screen Connect. It's a legitimate RMM tool.
Oh, so they're getting people to install the very thing that'll be used against them.
It's devious, but it works. It plays on that human trust we have. And there's Distant Spider. They're big on ConnectWise Screen Connect too. The report actually talks about how, like a Distant Spider intrusion, it accidentally gave access to an Alpha Spider affiliate, and they ended up demanding a ransom from the victim.
So one compromise can lead to another, like a chain reaction.
Yeah, it can snowball pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then you have Solar Spider. They were using phishing emails to spread this loader, and it would run the RMM tool, Remote Management System. They've also been known to use Net Support Manager, another RMM tool.
It's a trend. These groups are finding ways to weaponize these everyday tools. It really drives home the point that we can't be too careful about what we download, even if it looks like it's from a legitimate source.
You're absolutely right. And the report, it suggests that even though the big game hunting, going after the big targets, that's probably going to continue to be a big thing in the e-crime world, we should expect to see more of these smaller, more targeted attacks in 2024.
So more specialized attacks.
Oh.
So we've got these attack methods that keep evolving, these adversaries that are getting more and more sophisticated. It feels like it's constantly changing. What does all this mean for, the average person? What can we do to protect ourselves in this cyber world that seems to get crazier by the day?
Well, the first thing, the most important thing, is to realize the threat is real. It's not going away, and it's always changing. We can't just ignore it and hope for the best.
Right. Definitely not the time to bury our heads in the sand.
Nope. Right. But the good news is, knowing is half the battle. When you understand their tactics, what motivates them, the tools they use, you're already ahead of the game.
So knowledge is power. Where do we start? What can people actually do to be safer?
The report has some really good advice. First off, make protecting your identity your top priority.
We talked about identity attacks before. What can we do specifically to make ourselves less vulnerable there?
They really emphasize this phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. And it's not just about having it. It's about making sure it's set up right, that it's strong enough to withstand these clever attacks.
Okay, so don't just assume because you have MFA, you're good to go.
Exactly. And it's got to be everywhere, all your systems, even those old ones that might seem less important.
So even those systems we think are safe because they're not connected to the internet or because they're running old software.
Right. Those can be vulnerable too. And beyond the tech stuff, education is huge. Make sure everyone, your team, your family, they know about these social engineering tricks, how to spot a phishing attempt.
It's about creating that culture of awareness where everyone's on the lookout, everyone understands the risks.
That's a really good point. We sometimes forget about the human factor in all of this.
And tech can help too, right? There are tools that can help us stop these attacks before they happen.
Absolutely. The report recommends using tools that can spot and connect threats across everything, your identity, your endpoints, your cloud environments. It's about having a unified view of your security, not just a bunch of separate solutions.
So it's about a comprehensive approach, not just a bunch of tools.
Exactly. And speaking of the cloud, we talked about how it's a major target now. The report really stresses how important these cloud-native application protection platforms are, or CNAPPs.
CNAPPs, that's a mouthful. Can you break that down for us? What are they and why are they so important for cloud security?
A CNAPP, it's basically like a one-stop shop for all your cloud security tools. It makes it easier to watch for threats, detect them, and then respond to them in the cloud.
So it's about streamlining things, having a single place to manage your cloud security.
Exactly. And they suggest going with a CNAPP that has pre-runtime protection, so securing your applications before you even deploy them, runtime protection, so you're catching threats in real time, and agentless technology, so you can monitor and secure everything without having to install agents on every single system.
Sounds like there's a lot to think about, but the message is clear. We can't afford to ignore cloud security.
Absolutely not. And then there's the issue of speed. Like we talked about before, these attackers are moving incredibly fast. They can break in and spread through a system in minutes. The question is, can your security keep up?
Right. It's all about being able to detect and respond to threats quickly.
Exactly. And that's where the report points out the weaknesses of traditional security information and event management solutions, or SIMA.
Okay, SIM. For those of us who aren't security experts, can you explain what that is and why it's not cutting it anymore?
Sure. A SIM is basically a system that collects and analyzes security data from all over your network. It's supposed to help you spot and react to security incidents. The problem is, a lot of these older SAMs, they're just too slow, too complicated, and too expensive. They weren't built for the amount of data we're dealing up today, and they can't keep up with how fast these attacks are evolving.
So they're falling behind. What's the alternative?
The report recommends looking into these next-gen SIEM solutions, like the one CrowdStrike offers, Falcon Next-Gen SIEM. These newer solutions are cloud-based and use AI, so they can handle data much faster and are better at spotting threats.
So it's about using the cloud and AI to boost your security.
Exactly. And if you don't have the resources to manage all of this in-house, they also suggest thinking about managed detection and response, or MDR.
So basically outsourcing some of your security operations to the experts who can monitor and respond to threats around the clock.
It can be a good option, especially for those organizations that don't have the know-how or the staff to handle security on their own.
Makes sense. It seems like we're relying more and more on tech to solve these problems, but we can't forget about the human element, right? Technology is important, but it's not a cure-all.
You're absolutely right. The report really stresses the importance of building a strong cybersecurity culture within organizations.
Okay, so what does that look like? How do you actually create that kind of culture?
It starts with awareness training. Make sure everyone from the CEO down to the interns understands the risks, knows how to spot a phishing email, how to recognize those social engineering tactics.
So everyone's a part of the security team, in a way.
Exactly. Empower people to be that first line of defense. And it goes beyond just training. It's about fostering a culture where people aren't afraid to report something suspicious, where they're encouraged to follow security best practices. It's about making security everyone's responsibility, not just something the IT department deals with.
So it's about breaking down silos, working together.
Exactly. And for the security teams themselves, they recommend regular tabletop exercises and something called red-blue teaming.
I've heard of red teaming, but what's blue teaming?
So red teaming is where you have these ethical hackers, the good guys, and they try to break into your system, kind of like simulating a real attack. Blue teaming is your internal security team defending against the red team.
So it's like a practice run, seeing how well your defenses hold up?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a great way to be prepared for a real attack and to make sure your security team is ready.
It sounds like we're being encouraged to never stop learning, to always be challenging our assumptions, and to keep getting better.
That's the key takeaway. Cybersecurity isn't a finish line you cross. It's a journey. It's always evolving, and we have to keep learning and adapting to stay ahead of the bad guys.
This deep dive into the CrowdStrike report has really given us a lot to think about. It can be a bit overwhelming, but it's also empowering to understand the threats and what we can do about them. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring some more resources and strategies that can help you build up your defenses even further and create that culture of cybersecurity within your organization. So, stick with us. We'll be right back. We're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into the CrowdStrike 2024 Global Threat Report.
We've talked about a lot, those super fast interactive intrusions, how AI could change the game for cyber attacks. It's a lot. But let's shift gears a bit. We understand the threats now, but what can we actually do with this knowledge? It's one thing to know what's out there, but how do we actually protect ourselves?
You hit the nail on the head. That's the big question, right? And the good news is CrowdStrike doesn't just point out the problems. They give you a bunch of resources, tools to help organizations of all sizes really improve their security.
That's great. So let's say I'm a business owner and I'm listening to all this and I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Where do I even begin? Is there specific info for my industry, my region, something like that? Yeah, absolutely. CrowdStrike has this thing called the adversary universe. It's a treasure trove of information. They profile all these different adversaries, tell you their tactics, what they're after, how they do it. And it's always being updated, so you're not getting old news.
So it's like a who's who of the bad guys.
Exactly. It helps you see who might be targeting you specifically, and then you can, adjust your defenses to match.
Okay, so I've done my research. I understand the threats now, but now I got to actually do something about it. What are some practical things I can do to make my security better?
CrowdStrike has a whole suite of products and services to help you do just that. We've mentioned some of them. The Falcon platform, identity protection solutions, things specifically for the cloud, that next-gen SIEM we talked about.
It sounds like they've got it all covered.
They do, and the best part is all these things work together. It's not like you're piecing things together yourself. It's an integrated approach to security, you know?
So it's not just having the tools, it's about having a whole plan.
Exactly. And if you're not sure where to start, or if you need some extra help, CrowdStrike also offers different services. Like, they can help you with incident response, threat hunting, security assessments.
So if I'm in over my head, I can call in the cavalry.
You got it. They even have training programs to help you build up your security team's skills, if that's something you want to do.
It's a good reminder that, cybersecurity is a team sport. We got to work together if we want to stay ahead of these guys.
I couldn't agree more. And one thing I really like about CrowdStrike is that they're all about sharing what they know with the whole security community.
That's important, right? The more we all know, the better off we'll be.
Absolutely. They've got a blog. They're active on social media. They're always putting out reports and research, like this Global Threat Report we've been talking about.
So they're not just about selling stuff. They're actually trying to educate people.
Exactly. They're a great resource, whether you're a security expert or just someone who wants to know what's going on in the world of cyber threats.
This deep dive has really shown us that, the cyber threat landscape, it's complicated and it's always changing. It can be kind of scary.
It's true. The threats are real, they're evolving, and there's no easy answer. But we're not helpless. If we stay informed, if we invest in the right things, the right strategies, and if we work together, we can make things safer.
So as we wrap up this episode, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
Cybersecurity, it's not a destination, it's a journey. It's all about constantly learning, adapting, getting better. And the more effort we put into that journey, the better prepared we'll be for whatever comes next.
That's great advice. Knowledge is power. And this report, all the stuff CrowdStrike puts out there, it gives us that power, the power to make smart choices and actually protect ourselves and our organizations.
I agree. It's all about being proactive.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you learned something, and more importantly, we hope you feel empowered to take action. Stay safe out there in the digital world.